Alright guys, so with Cyberpunk coming out very soon, supposedly, it's kind of weird with uploading and everything because I want to do a first impressions video for Cyberpunk, so there might be a double upload today or one today and one tomorrow, so I'm making this video simply because I want to talk about something that Cyberpunk has to get right, and this is something that I've been planning on doing for a long time, probably since August or whenever the game was originally supposed to release, and just been pushing it back and back until we actually got closer to the release of the game. And so, if you haven't figured out what that thing is yet, it's pretty much something that all good RPG games need, and that's choice that actually matters. Because there's a lot of games, like if you look at Cold War, for example, the choices really don't make that much of a difference. Right? You can get small incremental changes to your endings, like Park, for example, being there, or the other guy being there, or neither of them being there, or, two slightly bigger changes, but realistically, again, because of the playtime of that campaign, they aren't that big a change. It's relatively the same thing. And so originally I was going to compare this game heavily to The Witcher 3 and kind of talk about the choices that they let you make in that and a relative early side quest. And we're still going to do that, but I'm also going to focus a bit on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as that's much more recent, and people, again, might not have played The Witcher 3 because it is 5 years old and they are remastering it on the new consoles. They might not want to be touching it and everything, so we'll do a bit of both just so that everyone can kind of understand the points I'm trying to make. But we're going to start with The Witcher 3. And so relatively early on in The Witcher 3, one of the early side quests, mainly for spoiler reasons, but it is one of the biggest representations of what I'm talking about here, is there's a quest revolving around the Bloody Baron and his wife and daughter. And so with choices, obviously, with The Witcher is kind of famous for having choices and letting you choose and having consequences for those actions, but with a lot of things, they give you choices that you know the outcomes of, right? If you're having a conversation with somebody, they give you a nice dialogue option, a mean dialogue option, you know that the person might not like you after, or might end up in a fight, something like that. You relatively have an idea of the choices that you're making and the consequences they're going to have. But something that's really important that kind of immerses people, I guess if that's the word you want to use, even more, is consequences on choices that you didn't know had consequences. And so let me try to explain that a bit with this plot line. And so essentially you're meeting characters that you just think are random people. You don't really know who they are. You don't know how they're going to tie in later. And again, you're making choices with these characters that you're meeting, and you don't know how big of an impact this is going to have. And I think, again, comparing this to Cyberpunk, this is something that they're going to have to do very well, especially with IGN and some of the other big sources coming in with their reviews saying how the game is relatively short at about 20 to 30 hours, which leads me to believe that they want you to replay the game, and with something like that, you have to have multiple different, very different outcomes, right? Because it's not short enough like Call of Duty. We can just go load up a load real quick and change a couple things. If you're going to replay, it is a commitment to sit down for 20, 30 hours to replay all these different multiple endings. And so they have to have a lot of different choices that matter, right? And again, that kind of choices that you don't know have consequences factor plays into your first playthrough, right? Because if you know what's going to happen, you can kind of tailor the game, I guess if that's the word you want to use, in the way you want it to go, right? You know this is going to have this consequence and result in this, and kind of push your player to go a certain path, whereas if you don't know these consequences and they're kind of just actions that you're choosing to make and you are making the choice, that's a very important part of it, right? You can't be forced to make these choices and then have consequences later. I'm talking about things that the player is given the choice to do. And so, dissecting, I guess, choice in games even further, there's two big types of choice, right? And I guess you could say there's side and main mission choices, but breaking it down even more in a more understandable way for you guys is there's choices that have a impact on the overall story, and I'll get into that with how that relates to The Witcher 3 here in a second. And then choices that have an impact, but they're more for visual, appeal or something like that, where they're not really going to impact what happens or the way the game goes. It's just shock value and something like that. For example, in The Witcher 3, when the Baron's wife turns into a monster, if you go down and release the spirit from the tree and do a certain quest line with the hags and all of that stuff, it has a choice, right? It's changing something that you could come back and play again and have a different outcome, but it's something that isn't overall that big of a impact on the story, right? Whereas the other choice from this chapter, arc, whatever you want to call it, results, spoilers, in the Baron possibly killing himself or not killing himself. And again, so the takeaway really from The Witcher 3, there's two big things, right? The choices have to have hidden consequences. They cannot all be blatant and apparent, right? If you know X is going to happen because I do this, you can kind of work your way around it. And I'm not saying they all have to be hidden and apparent. There can be obvious ones because that works well as a gameplay mechanic, but it plays better and helps the story flow better overall. And so the other thing that you can take away is the two types of choices, right? And again, there's really 4 types of choices if you really want to break it down, but it's the choices that have a huge impact on the story. Your character becomes good or bad after this. This character dies, or this character dies because of this choice. You lose this town or this town because of this choice, right? Those are big story arc-changing choices that you make throughout a game. And there should be 1, 2 of those to an arc, depending on how long an arc is, right? And then if you take the other types of choices, which are going to be small, not as much gameplay, huge story-changing choices, but choices that matter and show you that the open world is a real place with schedules and all that stuff, and that, you can jump over to Watch Dogs for an example on how to do that right. And so it needs to show that everything flows, right? It can't just be that you do this thing and then these people never appear again. These people should seem like they have lives and personalities and all that stuff. And choices that have consequences help overall just have everything feel like it's realistic and a real world scenario. And so from there, let's segue over to Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, because they do a great job in Assassin's Creed of that second thing from The Witcher that I just talked about, and showing how small, very minute consequences can kind of have an impact on building up the world. So, very minor spoilers for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. There'll be full spoilers in my review whenever I finish the game completely, but I'm just talking about a certain arc that's about 5 to 6 hours into the main story. And so this certain arc, there's an argument, and they're trying to get peace in this region, but, like with everything, one side wants one thing, one side wants the other thing, and they just cannot agree on it. And so you're tasked with being given a amount of silver, and you have to decide who to give it to kind of settle the quarrel between these two different sides. And so there's 2 different angles for this with choice, right? There's the big choice where, depending on who you give this currency to, certain characters live and certain characters die, and these are main characters. Again, I won't go into spoilers, but that's main story impacting stuff. These are characters that you've met before in multiple different regions and multiple different gameplay scenarios and main missions. They've shown up 10 plus times. They're big characters that you are killing off if you choose essentially the wrong choice here. And so while there is one right choice, all these other choices have small independent changes, while in the end they result in that same main story arc character dying, right? Unless you choose, obviously, the correct person. They have individual changes that if you give the money to this person and this person, they interact with you in different ways, and these are kind of the small changes I'm talking about, right? Again, in the end, the same thing happens because I chose the wrong choice still, but certain characters interact in different ways because of the choice that I made. And so that's all main story and main quest stuff. But what about side quests? 'Cause that's a big part of RPGs, and Valhalla shows that as well, really well, in kind of how giving the player choice, and not only apparent choice, like I said earlier, it's not pick this option or pick this option, it's figure this out, and there's multiple ways to figure it out, and the way you figure things out results in a different outcome. And so this is a side mission, so I'll go ahead and spoil this. I guess you guys won't mind. And so there's a certain mission where there's two brothers arguing over a house. And so one of them built the house, the other one did something for the house, I don't know, paid for it or something. It's one of the relatively early side missions. And so they're arguing over who owns this piece of property, right? And so there's a diplomatic way to talk to each of them and get them to agree and say, oh, well, this person did the work, or this person paid for it, this is who should get it, right? And you can make a choice there. Or you can do what I did and accidentally catch it on fire, and then the grief of all of their work and money being burned to the ground brings them together to build a new house and reunite. And something like that, it's not going to affect the main story. It's not going to matter. I got the XP for the side quest either way, no matter how I do it. It doesn't matter. But it makes a small choice that makes your playthrough feel different. Because when you compare that side quest to your friends, and you're like, oh no, I didn't have that happen, I had this happen. It makes the world feel more dynamic and just different overall. But overall, I'm trying not to keep this one too long for you guys. I just wanted to really point out, and again, there's other factors that are going to play into whether Cyberpunk is good or not, but I believe, like with a lot of RPGs, choice is the main thing that really decides if it's great, if it's worth replaying, all that good stuff. But you guys let me know what you think of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, I guess, because everybody loves it, Witcher 3, but let me know what you guys think of Assassin's Creed Valhalla down in the comments. If for some reason Cyberpunk is out or gets delayed within the next 24 hours, let me know what you think about that. The game should be coming out within a couple of hours by the time this video comes out, but most likely, there's no way, again, by the time you see this today, there will be a first impressions coming out for Cyberpunk, possibly tomorrow. I want to try to get through the intro section of the game, which I've heard is 6 to 8 hours, but we'll get through that. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, that review will be coming out eventually. I'm still grinding through that. I'm 70-something hours into the game, and just really doing everything, trying to 100% it. But, again, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys on the next one. Around in and spending a lot of time in, fuck, I spilled my mouth.